Right. Just going to give it about a minute again, and then we'll get started.
Sounds good.
Right. If you are joining and you want to just put in the chat where you're tuning in from, we always like to see where people are joining in the province. But thank you so much for joining me tonight. My name is Krystal. If you've listened to the EV Life podcast, then you'll recognize my name and probably my voice as well. If you don't recognize my name and my voice, that means you haven't listened to the podcast yet. So I would obviously definitely recommend you check that out because it's a great resource if you're looking to learn about EVs. We talk to a host of experts on the podcast, and you can get that anywhere you stream your podcast. Also, if you're looking to learn a bit more about that Alberta perspective to owning an EV, join our EV Life community. You can connect with other EV curious Albertans and also people who own and drive EVs in Alberta. Speaking of which, we're joined by one of those Albertan EV owners right now, Angie Thomas. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So, Angie has owned an EV for 2 years now, right?
Yeah.
And you're also a member of the EVAA.
Right.
So can you tell me how you joined the EVAA and what EV you bought? Like, what do you drive?
Well, I'll start with, so EVAA stands for the Electric Vehicle Association of Alberta. And we are a group really of owners committed to sort of just telling people what it's really like. And how I joined, I met the board 2 years ago when I started coming to events, and I had the new shiny fancy car, which is a Hyundai Ioniq 5. It was the first model year. And I basically came up to the board and said, it can't be all about Teslas, because they all drive Teslas, except for one has a Lightning, but he still has a Tesla too. And it can't be all about boys. And so they quickly realized that, yeah, having some diversity is a good thing. And so it's a really great group of guys. And yeah, we do some pretty awesome work together. So,
are you the only woman on the board?
Yes.
So we need some more.
I'm also the only one without a Tesla.
So we need some more non-Tesla women owners on the EVAA. But I'm so glad that you're joining me today.
Yeah.
You said that you drive the Ioniq 5.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you tell us why you own this with your husband? Can you tell me why you guys decided to purchase this vehicle and what made you decide to buy an EV in the first place?
Well, really in January, so my car's a 2022. So in January, I think 2021, I wrote off a vehicle. My fault. It doesn't matter how I got there, but I needed a new vehicle. But we were also right in the midst of COVID. And so we were kind of like, what are we gonna get? And I was prepared to buy like, a used Ford Escape or something because I had an SUV before. And my husband and I sort of sat down and went, well, we have a second car, and he was working from home. I wasn't. So we had that luxury of being able to wait. And it really came down to that the Ioniq was the first one that we liked the look of it. We wanted something different. We live in Edmonton, and a lot of people in our neighborhood have Teslas, and I had an orange SUV, so I wanted something that had a little bit of curb appeal. Something
you like to stand out.
Yep. And so I really liked the look of the Ioniq, but it ultimately, and so we had a whole spreadsheet of what we wanted, what we didn't, who had what. But it was really early days. So like we knew we couldn't get the Volkswagen because they weren't even selling them in Alberta. And we weren't sure if they were even going to have the Aria, the Nissan Aria, and so it was sort of just putting the list out. And it sort of seemed to be that it was down to like Kia EV6 and the Ioniq 5. And I just really liked the Ioniq 5 better, but ultimately they were the first two that came to market. So that was the big reason why. And like I said, the fact that we really liked the look of it. So.
Were you able to get it quickly? Because you kind of talked a little bit about like there weren't a lot of vehicles in market. Like how long did it take you?
I actually called my local dealership and I was like, how do I get one? And they were like, we make a list.
Oh, I think I lost you there
We
for.
started a list. And from the best we can figure, I was the first person in Western Canada to do a deposit. So I started the list, at least on this end. And then that was, I think, in April of 2021. And then I think in June of 2021, they officially started taking deposits. And it wasn't until basically April of 2022 that we finally got it. So it was a full year and then some. So we just watched a lot of Ionic 5 videos from Korea and then in the UK as it got there, and then in the US. And
So
I
you
actually
had
didn't
not,
even,
you didn't test drive it at all.
nope. I test drove it. The closest I came was a lower trim model, I think in the fall, like in November-ish, because they were pushing out the lower trim first. And then they were pushing out my trim. So until I actually got my car, I hadn't actually test drive it. I mean, I could have walked away, but we took it for a test drive that night and we're instantly in love. And yeah,
So it worked out.
definitely.
It would have been a big
It was
disappointment
well worth
after the
the wait,
year
in my
to
opinion.
not like it after that long wait. So I'm glad you it worked out well. So you've owned it now for going on 2 years. Well, just about 2 years, right? Because you
Two
picked it up.
years in April. Yeah. So
Right.
just over 2 years. Yeah.
So one question that we get a lot from people who are considering an EV is just like the charging situation,
Yeah.
right? So did you install home charging? Were you just like plugging in? Like what was the charging situation when you first bought it?
So when we first bought it, we actually didn't have a charger installed. We have a garage heater. So we have I want to say it's like a 20 amp plug, but my husband, who's in here, will probably correct me on that. But we use that plug initially just because with the charger, because the charger we had at the time could use different speed. So it worked really well. And then once it got cold, we actually had them wire in essentially a dryer plug into our garage so that we could use our garage heater because our bedroom's right above our garage and also plug it in. But we only plug in probably twice a week in the winter, and that's when it's really cold, like minus 15, minus 20. The rest of the time, we're plugging it in once a week. I mean, things are different this week because we just got solar last week. So now, as soon as I come home, I plug it in, but that's because I'm trying to get as much sunshine power into my car as possible so I don't have to pay for it.
Okay, let's backtrack a little bit. So in the winter, you're charging twice a week. In the
Yeah.
summer, like right now, you're about once a week. Is
Yeah.
that how much range are you getting per
In
charge?
most cases on the highway, I can get 450 if I'm sticking
Okay.
to like 110-ish. The faster you drive, it does suck your range down quite a bit. It's like pushing a brick through a wall,
Yeah.
or through wind. And in the summer, I like in the city, for commuting, I can get over 500, no problem.
And what's your driving habits like? Like, are you driving it every day or is it like, are
Yep.
you, yeah, every day?
Yeah.
So that's kind of
I
like my,
work, I'm an assistant, an executive assistant. So my boss likes me in the office. So I'm in the office every day. I don't get the privilege of working from home. So
so you're
yeah,
commuting
no,
every day with it and you can
every day.
still get away with plugging in once a week.
Yep, absolutely.
Not bad. So I'm just kind of like flabbergasted. It's like I think the perception is that you have to charge more frequently.
Yep.
But I mean, one of the I wouldn't say it's a myth because it is true, and I think it's true for ICE vehicles as well. In the wintertime, you get less range
Hmm.
because of the extreme temperatures. But twice a week, that's not much more than charging,
Yeah.
once a week, right? Like it's only
Yeah.
twice as much. But have you ever run into a situation where you thought you were going to run out of charge?
No, when I think the twice a week, I mean, I know when we had that really cold snap, like minus 35 and that kind of stuff. And I was, like I said, I was coming into to the office every day in those weeks. I think, sort of during that week, I might have plugged it in like sort of maybe a third time, that kind of thing. But most of the range loss that I encountered is because I'm running the heated seats and because I'm running the heated steering wheel. And yeah, I could operate with those, but I don't want to. I
Right,
like
you got it for a
being
reason.
warm.
For
And I
sure.
mean, and the other part is that it's that cold, the cooling system, like the HVAC system that's in the car, it has its own system that is designed to keep the car or the battery warm when it's cold or cold when it's hot, right? So it spends all power doing that as well. And so that's again where some of that range loss comes from too. But
So you're typically driving just in the city, just kind of
Mhm.
commuting to and from work, but have you ever
Yep.
taken it on a long distance trip?
It's funny that you should ask that. So the first one we did was last year. We drove all the way down to Oregon. When we left I think on a Friday night, and we wanted to make it sort of as far as we could to get. It was actually -30. I think we stopped in High River, and there, at least last year, was no charging at a hotel. So we charged it up the night before at a charger we found, and then went to the hotel, and then came back the next morning and charged up again. And again, keep in mind that this was before we had preconditioning, because my model year did not have that. For people who don't know what that is, it's where the battery gets heated up so that when you get to a charger, your battery's nice and toasty warm and can charge faster. So we didn't have that. So by the time we got, when we left High River, it was -30. By the time I got to Spokane, it had gotten down to like -5. So just driving south, you're automatically getting a little bit more range because you don't need to spend as much power trying to keep that battery warm. And it did definitely take a little bit longer for us. We have since gotten preconditioning through a software update. And so another trip we took to BC was much faster because your battery is that much warmer. So your charging stops take a lot less. And in most cases, we're generally between 20-25 minutes. The worst case,
And that's
it's
with the
pretty easy.
preconditioning.
Yeah, yeah,
So do you kind
definitely.
of work it into like your typical rest stops, like on the way you'll kind of work in? Because I think a lot of the chargers are around facilities where you can go and grab a coffee or use the
Yep.
washroom and yeah, walk around a bit. So it sort of works out a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of the trips we take are typically more in the summer. That particular one we left at the end of February, and we were going to Emerald City Comic Con in Seattle, which is at the beginning of March. So we didn't really have the luxury of waiting till it was warmer. Normally, if we're going to do that trip to the coast, we try and keep it, like we were out in Soyuz a couple of weeks ago in June, where then preconditioning isn't really an issue. It's just for that particular event, we wanted
Mhm.
to go, and it's in a not exactly warm period of time. So
How long does it take to charge during those kind of colder spells without the preconditioning? Do you remember?
I think it was a little, well, I mean, in Pacific Northwest, there's lots of charging. So in the US, definitely. I mean, it was more expensive because you're paying US fees, but it was probably still like 45 minutes, maybe is the worst,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. To the flip side, where, we're doing, like I said, summer trips, we were on this last trip and my husband said it's too fast, like it's 20 minutes, I don't have time to go grab lunch. He's like, you got 18 minutes to go pee and get a water and then I'm leaving. And I'm like, don't leave without me.
Yeah.
And he's like, it's too fast, I don't have time to stop and have lunch. And I was like, we can just park. And he's like, no, he's like, we're done charging, we got to get back on the road.
He means business. He's on a mission.
Right,
You
yeah.
can only stop for as long as it takes for the car to charge. It's going to be a problem when it starts getting more efficient.
Yeah, right, yeah, 100%.
So what was the experience like finding public charging?
Um, it's funny, this last trip that we did to BC, we discovered that so you now in Canada can charge per minute or per kilowatt. It's always been per minute. And so now some people are starting to charge per kilowatt. And some of that is just, that's how machines have chosen, depending on the company that runs it. We actually found that with our Hyundai Ioniq, that it's actually for us more effective to do the per minute charging, just because Hyundai, and this goes the same with Kia and Genesis, they all share the same battery pack. They, according to their commercial, will say that, from 10 to 80 in 18 minutes. And if you get a machine that's, 150 or up to like one of the big 350 machines, they're totally legitimately true. Like it really will do it in 18 minutes.
Yeah.
And so we found some of the per minute ones were actually cheaper because we're charging so fast in that per minute stage, or in that like how quickly we're charging, versus if we're actually paying for the amount of energy used, the per kilowatt, it's a little bit more. I mean, they're still way cheaper than gas. But you also have to look at things like Electrify Canada. We paid for, I think, 3 charge stops. We paid $90, and our entire charging trip was like $200. So Electrify Canada, for us, we basically just avoid that, unless it's the only thing that's available.
Was it because were they charging per kilowatt?
It actually wasn't even that they were charging per kilowatt. It was just they're more expensive. So, yes, they charge per kilowatt, but they also charge like more per kilowatt. So we found a lot of places like Shell Recharge was really good. Petro-Canada was really good. So you sort of learn to figure out your favorite. So either your favorite brands or your favorite stations and that kind of thing, especially once you've done a trip more than a couple of times, if it's a regular trip. For us, going to the West Coast, it's a common thing because I have family out there. So.
And how were you paying for charging? Do you have to have app for each of these different companies? Was there, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Flow has and ChargePoint have really worked with a lot of companies. So like Flow now partners. So like like BC Hydro had their own app, and so we've dropped that one because they now work with Flow as well. So again, it's really knowing your groups, that Flow works with these apps and ChargePoint works with a bunch. Those were the 2 primary ones, and obviously keeping Electrify Canada because they don't work with either. But it's nice to see a lot of companies really sort of, getting that synergy going so that you don't have to have 17 apps. You maybe only have to have 3 or 4. But it would be nice at some point. Some of the states, especially in the US, you just pay by credit card. And so it'd be really nice if that would come up here. And I think it will. It's just, again, it's sort of figuring out how to manage that and that kind of thing. So,
Yeah, it'll eventually trickle up to Canada.
yeah.
So you've been driving an EV now for 2 years. Is there
Yep.
anything that you know now that you didn't know when you purchased it, you wish you would have known? Anything that might be a helpful tip for someone considering buying an EV?
I think really it's just sort of knowing what you're looking for. Like I said, especially it's my husband, we did this buying our house, that coming up with a list of what do you want, what do you have to have, what do you need to have, what would you like to have, and then finding those. And hopefully there's one that works for you, but if there isn't, that's okay, because there's so many new models coming out. I mean, we were at the Father's Day show on Sunday, and we had 6 EVs. 4 of them were 2 years or less, or like there was a Volkswagen ID4, which is new. There was a brand new Kia EV9, which is new. We've had the Lyric, which is also new. So there's all these new brands and things coming out. So I think if I had anything, it would be, I would love to have more choice.
Right.
But yeah, there was, not a lot of choice when I bought mine. So
Yeah, so take your time, do your research,
yeah,
and find
absolutely.
something that works for you.
Yeah,
Have you
and
found,
I was gonna say, and rent an EV. There's lots of EVs on Turo. That's a big one. A lot of people don't understand what it's like to, especially the instant torque. In terms of, you put the accelerator down, you will pretty much beat anything off the line.
I tried that, and yeah, it's fast. It's
It's fun,
fast.
huh?
It's well, fun for some people. I think if you like if you like roller coasters, it's fun. That's what I'll say. But yeah, they can go fast. Someone's asking in the comments, what are some most common misconceptions you hear about EVs? Yeah, I guess as an EV owner, you probably
Mhm.
hear a lot of things that people say that you're like, no, 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 that's not the
Yeah,
case at all. Is there
yeah.
anything that stands out to you?
I mean, obviously there's the big ones about the winter range and things like that. And you do lose, a percent for every degree below 0. And that's a given. And like I said, you can mitigate some of that if you're willing to not make it as warm, if you don't want the
Mhm.
heated seats. But again, like I said, we're all creatures of comfort, or at least I am. So, you know, there are
Same.
some things to do that. And in most cases, you're probably not going for a long road trip. But if you are, charging's getting better. There's things around that. So you sort of have to just look at your individual situation. You can, you know, join the EV Life group. You can come to any of our events. We have several of them, and we can sort of give you our experiences. And then always the grid can't handle it is another big one. But we have two board members who are from at EPCOR and ATCO, and they tell us that the grid is growing every year, and we just added the new plant. So we're no longer coal powered anymore, which is awesome. So we're definitely making strides in terms of growing the grid. So that's definitely going to make a difference. And if we eventually get, you know, time of use where it's cheaper overnight, that'll also help. People aren't plugging in their cars every night,
Right.
which again, like you said, I think a lot of people think that, and some people do. That's fine, but some people don't. So
Right. And speaking of the grid, we did speak to some people on the podcast about that. So if you are interested in learning more and hearing some of those conversations, that's my second plug for the podcast. It'll be my last, but
it's a
really.
great podcast.
And I did get another question sent to me.
Sure.
So someone Bill asked about comments on Chinese EVs. And I don't know if you have any knowledge on them and if you'd like to share any thoughts that you might have, if you do.
Um, I've really been following BYD. It's a Chinese brand, and I think if those kinds of brands that can make sort of inexpensive, you know, EVs that are reliable, I think the legacy automakers are really going to have a run for their money. It's unfortunate that, you know, they're getting all these really cool small EVs in Europe. Like they don't make the e-Golf by Volkswagen anymore because supposedly nobody wants it. I would buy it, but I
Right.
can't get one. And if you can get one, they sell really quickly because there's not very many of them. So I think really the big challenge is getting some of those lower priced you know, EVs here. And if they get a chance to come to US and hopefully into Canada as well, that's definitely gonna shake things up a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, and Bill, if you're listening and you want to share what your thoughts are, because that question was from you, and I thought that was quite interesting. So thanks, Angie, for sharing your thoughts on that. And if
No
anyone
worries.
else has another question that you'd like to ask Angie, feel free to put it in the comment. And if she can answer it, I'm sure she will. But I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
You said you just got solar panels installed.
Yes,
Tell
definitely.
me about that.
So yeah, we just got solar panels installed in the last couple of weeks. So we're I think we just had our electrical inspection approved today. So we're still waiting for EPCOR to, you know, sign off on it. But in the meantime, we are basically just using the power to charge our car and our house and things like that. So when I got home today, we immediately plugged it in because it's a nice sunny day. And so I can charge my car essentially for free because I took advantage of the NRCan loan and things like that. So it'll be nice to not have. I mean, expect energy bills aren't that much. They're probably $50 to $60 a month, but it'll be nice to have lower ones in the summer or ones where I'm getting paid. That kind of thing as well. So
Yeah, that's so interesting. And then another question. So I didn't
mhm,
prepare you for this. So if you don't have the
that's
numbers,
okay.
that's fine. But one of the biggest questions that people ask again is like what the cost is, right? Like how does it compare to owning a nice vehicle, like filling up gas?
Yeah.
Like what are your yearly average costs for charging if you know that number?
I know on average we've been about 40 to $60 a month. Usually I think 50 to $60 a month. Up
Mhm.
until now is generally we're looking at, which is a big change from the $250 a month I was paying for gas. Keeping in mind that we had a BMW 3 Series that took premium. So and yeah, it was a thirsty girl. So yeah, it's definitely a nice cry, and I definitely don't miss the standing at the gas station when it's really really cold.
Yeah, so a big difference there. And
Yeah.
then now with the solar panels, probably less.
Definitely, especially in the summer. It's like I said, we're hoping to, like I said, we should be able to get a credit from once we're able to be approved as a micro generator. And if you are looking more at solar, there is an event in Camrose on Saturday. It's the Camrose Solar tour, and EVA has an event there as well. We'll have probably 6 to 9 cars as well, if you want to see, if you feel like taking a little drive this weekend.
That would be a good opportunity if you
Oh,
were considering an EV to go and have a look at some. I see Sean
that's
commented.
my husband. Yeah, he's my numbers guy.
Thank you, Sean. So Sean is saying summer charging is about $20 to $30 a month and winter $40 to $60 a month. So that is pretty good.
Yeah, definitely.
So I haven't gotten any other questions, but I wanted to ask, because you mentioned that when you were looking to buy an EV, there really weren't a ton of options to choose from.
Yeah,
If you were to buy an EV today with the options now, what would you choose? Would you still choose the Ioniq, or would you maybe go a different route?
I would definitely still choose something in the Kia Hyundai Genesis range, because the ability to charge so fast. I mean, they're the only company that's done the 800-volt technology, which allows them to charge. And so that's a huge time saver when you're doing it. So if I was going to buy something else, I mean, I know my husband really wants a sedan, so maybe I might save up all my pennies and buy a Genesis GV60. But it would definitely be with that same battery pack, because Hyundai knows what they're doing. They're with when it comes to the I know the US is bringing in tariffs and stuff on foreign built cars. They're building a plant. It's like they saw the writing on the wall. So they won't have to pay those tariffs because they're building cars in the US. So they're really ahead of the game, and they're really pushing out a lot of cars. And with those 3 manufacturers behind them, they're doing some impressive stuff. So it would definitely be something in that range of cars. And I mean, that being said, depending on what you're looking for features, there is still a wait from what I hear from a lot of people. But in my opinion, they're worth it. They're, like I said, really well made. And like I said, especially that charging, the fact that get to being the same amount of time as you'd be at a gas station. Because let's be honest, you go fill up your gas, by the time you get some snacks and go pee, it's 20, 25 minutes anyways.
Right. And as Sean mentioned, he needs to get lunch, right? He needs time to go and
Exactly.
grab lunch.
Yeah.
So Nicole asked, what was the shopping experience like? Did you do a lot of test drives? Did you find the salespeople were knowledgeable about their EVs? So,
I will tell you about, so most of the dealerships really didn't have anything. I went to the Kia West End dealership because they had a Kia Niro, which is an older EV. And I was able to test drive that. And the sales manager there was great. He was smart. He was like, don't BS EV people, because he's like, they probably know more than you, which at that time was 100% correct. And I took the EV. We got it lined up again. We turned the corner, lined it up, and by the time I had gotten to the next stop sign, I was going 70. So we're talking one city block, and I was like, wow, these kind of go. And that was a way slower car than the EV that I had. So no, there really wasn't a lot of test driving. I mean, there's definitely more. A lot has happened in the last 2 years, and especially with being able to rent on Turo. That's a great option to be able to test drive a vehicle for a weekend, that kind of thing. But a lot of the dealerships are even doing several day rentals to allow you to sort of get that full experience, from what I've heard. So it's a much better place than what I bought it.
yeah, I think a lot has changed in the past 2 years. And just for the EV Life community, we've been going to dealerships and taking a look at some of the EVs that they have to kind of get content to show what is on the market. And there's so much more that's come on in the last, even the last year. So I think for someone looking to buy an EV now, you have a better chance of going in, like you said, and getting to
Yeah,
that test drive experience that people want when they're buying a new car.
definitely.
Kristen wants to know, how often do you need maintenance on your EV?
We have done the oil, or sorry, the air filter. Sorry, oil. No oil changes. We have done the air filter a couple of times. We did it once at the dealership, and it's kind of expensive to do it from them. So we did it the second time because it's a really easy thing to do.
You all did
I
it
think,
yourself at home?
yeah, yeah, it's not very hard at all. I think the big one we have, which I think we were supposed to do at our last appointment, we haven't, was doing the coolant flush. And that's because we're just at almost at 70,000 kilometers. And that's the system that runs your HVAC, because you're not having to wait for that engine to warm up. And so it also keeps the battery cool or warm depending. So you have to do a coolant flush. And I don't know the price of it off the top of my head. My husband might very well know. But it's that's the big one. I think we've done a tire rotation, and obviously swapping winter and summer tires. But and when we go, they check the brakes to make sure that they're still in good condition. Because like you said on if you haven't listened to the most recent podcast, you talked about maintenance, and it's a great one. And if you do drive a rear wheel drive EV, ours is all wheel drive, you definitely need to swap those tires front and back. I've heard that from a lot of people because there's a little bit more wear on the rear. Again, look at your tires, look at your driving style. But yeah, take it to someone who can competently look at that, see what your brakes are looking like. There's a lot of buildup of brake dust because you're not using them. So they want to make sure they're still working and things like that. So it's definitely less, but it's not zero.
So just for someone who might not know, when you say you're not using your brakes, can you maybe just clarify what you mean
Sure.
by that?
So basically how it works is when you take your foot off of the accelerator, if you're using, depending on your vehicle, they all do it a little bit differently. But in mine, I have a regenerative braking, and it's either level 1, 2, or 3. So if I have it, it's set to level 3. When I take my foot off the accelerator, it feels like you're pressing the brake, but it's not. It's basically the engine recuperating that energy that's lost to put it back in by essentially doing, for lack of a better word, engine braking. That's a very simplified way of doing it. So it's not exactly like that, but to give you sort of an idea of how it does it. So when we always say when you're driving through the mountains, for us, it's essentially flat because you're driving up the hill and you're using all your energy. But when you're going down the other side, you're using regenerative braking. And I know one of our board members left Marmot, and by the time he got to Jasper, he had gained 1%.
That's nice, right? That's handy.
Woohoo! Gained a whole percent. So, it's essentially, it didn't cost you anything to drive down that hill.
For anyone who's like driven through the mountains on, like a quarter tank of gas, nice vehicle, like it's very nerve-wracking because there aren't very many gas stations. So that's
Mm-hmm.
definitely like that gives you like a little peace of mind
Yeah. Well,
when
and the
you're
flip,
gaining.
yeah. And the other side of that is passing is a dream because EVs have so much torque initially. Like I know a lot of people are like, yes, it comes off the line really quickly. And yeah, it does. No one says you have to use that. But when you're passing up a hill, no problem. Like we were heading back from BC, and there was I think it was a set of 4 Porsches who were out for a day. And my husband was driving, and was keeping up to all 4 of them. And I'm sure the last one was like, what is behind me and why? How up a hill is he keeping up? Because we could have passed them. We chose not to because they're having fun.
Yeah.
But we were like, go faster. Can't you go faster? I can go faster.
It probably would have made their day to see
Oh, I'm
you
sure.
pass them,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So Bill did have another question. He said, we were just in Iceland and the EV charging infrastructure there was pretty impressive. What do you think needs to happen in Canada? And I don't know if I've never been to Iceland, so I'm not familiar with the infrastructure there. I don't know if you are.
Me neither. But I've watched a lot of YouTube videos. I think, I know there's an EV, I don't know, for lack of a better word, a gas station or a charging station that's opening up on the south side. And I think we need to see more of that kind of thing because that's in Europe, especially. You see lots of those big stations where it's like an EV station where just like a gas station. You have lots of several pumps and things like that, and they have little cafe and places to go and do your time and that kind of thing. And that's what we need to see right now. A lot of them are in the parking lots, same parking lots, and that's great. But if I could open a business, that is what I would do. I would open up something that had like a whole bunch of charging and have like a little cafe or a restaurant, but again, quick, so that people aren't staying very long. They're only staying half an hour. To be able to get some internet and get some snacks and get a light lunch and those kinds of things. And I think we need to see more of that, especially in the north and the east. Those are the areas that we're still sort of lacking. And again, it will come. Last summer, we didn't have a charging station that was the fast one in Red Deer. We now do. So Electrify Canada put one in there, and it's, again, super fast. So depending on your car, if you can't make it from Edmonton to Calgary, especially if you're driving in the winter, it's a great place to stop to charge up.
All right. Well, Angie, thank you so much for joining me tonight. This was such a lovely
No worries.
conversation. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up? I don't see any other questions that have come in. If you do have a question you want to ask Angie, I would get it in now. But yeah, is there anything we didn't cover that you'd like to share?
I think really the big thing I would suggest is, definitely check out our website. It's albertaev.ca. And we definitely have lots of events so you can see the vehicles. And like I said, it's all owners, it's all people who bring their own vehicles. We volunteer our time. We're not affiliated with any dealerships or anything like that. So you can come out and see the cars. I know there's 2 events this weekend. Forgive me, I've forgotten where the other event is. I know it's in the city, it's at a dealership, but it's on our website. But again, there'll be opportunities to see EVs at both locations. And then that way you can sort of sit in them, try them out, ask people questions, and that kind of stuff. So,
and ask people who are driving them and who own them and have had some
yeah,
experience with them, right? So you're really
absolutely
getting that true perspective of what it's like
right.
to own that car.
Absolutely. Yep, definitely.
So that's albertaev.ca. And
Yep.
again, if you'd like to also connect with other Albertans who are curious, looking to learn more about EVs and other people who actually own EVs, I would encourage you to join the EV Life group on the AMA mobile app. And yeah, if you have any questions, anything that you'd like to follow up with, feel free to put some questions in the group and we will follow up with you. But I think if that's all the questions that we have for tonight, we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining us. This was excellent. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Awesome.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.